While 2D games aren't everyone's cup of tea, they are still very popular and offer a lot of things which some other games don't. For example, their accessibility, unique artwork, and much simpler controls attracts many people including myself, which is what I love about 2D games so much. Most 2D games within the industry are used by indie developers, simply because they're a lot easier and quicker to make, as well as the fact that they're able to be more creative in their respective work. They may not be the most visually stunning games ever, but they have their own uniqueness, which is what makes them so popular and appealing to many people. Recall Empty Wishes is another one of those games which has unique artwork, a good storyline, simple mechanics and good gameplay. Developed by newcomers Puffix Studio and published by experienced indie publishers Dungeon Entertainment, who have also released games such as The Witch's House, Bug Fables and the most popular game, Crosscode. I haven't played any of the other games prior, so I couldn't really make any comparisons to Recall Empty Wishes to see if they could stand up to any of their previous titles. But considering this was Puffix Studio's first game, I thought they did pretty well. Some aspects may not have been that good, which I'll talk about later, but they had good ideas and you can see that if you played the game yourself. I have no doubt that with more experience they'll produce some solid titles in the future. A psychological indie thriller available to play on Xbox Series X, S, PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch and Steam. Set in Taiwan during the 2010s, it follows Yonny, a sister who is determined to solve the mystery of the disappearance of her younger brother Tommy. One day, she discovers an old toy phone receiver that she and Tommy used to play with as children. There's more to it than meets the eye, however, as it connects Yonny and her friend Phoebe into a realm where they can enter the memories of people linked to Tommy and interact with their phantoms to find out more about his disappearance. Using the receivers, they are able to tap into each individual's deepest desires in the hope that they can somehow uncover the truth behind Tommy's disappearance. I thought that this was a fairly good thriller. The art style and the story was what drew me to playing the game the most. I love 2D games and indie games, so both combined wasn't really much of a hard choice for me. Indie games rarely disappoint when it comes to the quality of their games, but of course, just like any other genre of games, there will always be some disappointing games which just can't be helped. What makes indie games so good is the fact that most of them are extremely unique and offer you different ways to play and experience a game. The storylines can also be a lot more creative compared to AAA games, but both do some things better than the other, just like other genres. They're all good in their own way. The story of this game was most definitely interesting. At first it may seem basic. Someone close to the protagonist goes missing, then they set on the journey to uncover a truth. But what I liked about this game is that you found out the truth by entering the memories of different people. It wasn't actually happening in the real world, which I liked. So all you could do is see how Tommy's disappearance started and what drove him to it. You couldn't actually change the inevitable outcome. You were able to interact with phantoms and explore several different environments when tapping into each individual's memories. The phantoms would give us interesting information about the current situation on hand, and would just add more depth to the story in general. There were a lot of things and people to interact with, so you were constantly finding items and learning about the past. Around 60% of the game was a visual novel, whilst the other 40% was actual gameplay. It can be hard implementing both of these things since you need a good balance of pointing and clicking as well as gameplay. Too much reading and pointing and clicking can bore people and they would lose interest in the game fairly quickly, but too much gameplay isn't really a problem. The game leads towards a visual novel type ever so slightly. There's plenty of gameplay, but most parts of it is reading. The game was fairly straightforward, there wasn't much difficulty to it despite some puzzles being included, if you even want to call them that. All of them were extremely simple, it didn't take much brain power to figure them out. I thought that the soundtrack was pretty good, all of the music fit with the theme of the game, whether you were walking around the school or reading dialogues, it matched with the mood pretty well. The game ran smoothly, I didn't encounter any technical issues such as crashes or bugs, which is always nice, and the load times were fairly quick. In total, it only took me around 4 hours to finish the game. It's fairly short and can be done in one sitting with a break in between. I don't personally think it's really replayable unless you're somewhat of an achievement hunter, unless of course you already got all of them in your first playthrough. But if you're not bothered about achievement, then I don't see much reason to replay it, unless you're a big fan of the game of course. Whilst it is a psychological horror, it isn't really scary at all. Not all psychological horror games are scary, but a vast majority of them do have some occasional scary moments, which this game didn't. There's a segment towards the end of the game where you're sometimes chased by your childhood stuffed rabbit Levi, who turned into some sort of monster. But even then, it's extremely easy to escape from him, and he becomes more of a nuisance than actually being scary. But apart from that, it doesn't really have many horror elements to it. Staying on the topic of the end of the game, I wasn't the biggest fan of the ending. I know that the whole point was to uncover the truth behind Tommy's disappearance and not actively search for him, but I kind of expected him to return and make for a happy ending, which unfortunately didn't happen. The game costs £11 if you're buying on Steam or Xbox, and if you're on PlayStation you'll have to fork out an extra £4. I don't think the game is worth that much personally, but that's purely down to how long it is, and if you compare it to the quality of other games which are around the same price or even cheaper, then you'll realise that it's probably not worth that much. I don't think it's an awful price at all. However, I understand that companies need to make profit, so I don't blame them, but I would probably wait until it goes on sale so you can snap it up for a lot cheaper, unless you're impatient of course. But overall, I thought it was a decent indie game. The story was interesting, the art style was nice, and the gameplay was simple and smooth. However, most of the characters didn't have much depth to them. I thought the puzzles were slightly too easy and not at all challenging. The ending was slightly disappointing and there wasn't much of a horror aspect to it. But with that said, I still think it's a good game. I'd recommend this game to people who like visual novel games especially, since as mentioned earlier, most of the game is reading, so to enjoy this game fully you would have to be a fan of the genre. If you're not a fan of visual novels but enjoy indie and 2D games, then I would still recommend this to you. You might find some parts boring, but you will enjoy the rest of the gameplay. My rating for Really Cool Empty Wishes is a 7 out of 10.